First off, thanks for coming through and taking the time to watch my video. I really appreciate that. But I have to let you guys know that nothing I say is financial advice, and I'm not responsible for any wins or losses you take while trading, and I am by no means a licensed financial advisor. Now that we got that out of the way, let's go ahead and hop into this video. Today we're going to be going over some cool stuff. Now today I kind of want to start to ease into how we put it all together and how we use them in a live market, and how we determine what POIs we use, how we determine the context of our overall trades. We have these tools that we've went over, such as internal structure or market structure, supply and demand. All that's really great, but if you don't know how to put it all together and you don't have a very specific criteria for what are the parameters for you to exit a trade, then you're not going to have much of a system, because without confidence in what you're doing, you're going to experience a lot of paralysis by analysis. You're going to find yourself in chat, asking others if you should take the trade or if you shouldn't, which sometimes can help. Sometimes it can, either talk you into a bad move or talk you out of a good one. But all of this, which this is the biggest problem people have. I can sit and teach you how to draw supply and demand zones. I can teach you market structure. I can teach you liquidity. But if you don't have your psychology down, then it's really not going to help you much. In fact, it'll probably frustrate you more than before, whenever you kind of were trading before you knew these concepts, because it's like you learn them and they're working for other people, and it's a really good strategy, but you find yourself not being able to execute. And what this really comes from is the lack of wanting to put in work and back testing, or the lack of patience when you're forward testing. A lot of people will talk and say that you can't learn anything off of a demo because there's not real money in the market, or back testing. That's just not true. Now, there are certain obstacles that you only will learn to cross by having money involved. That is true, but that doesn't mean that back testing or using a demo is a completely hollow experience. If you can discipline yourself enough to take a small amount of time, 1 to 2 hours a week, and go back and back test a specific criteria on maybe a specific asset, even at a specific time of day, or however you do your testing, maybe just two hours a week, you would be able to gain data, and you can tell yourself, this works or this doesn't. So if you have data that says, here's all my checklist, all of these have been met, and they need to be direct, very mechanical, very specific parameters for you to execute. Not you can't say something like, oh, every time this looks really good on the 4 hour, or oh, every time the RSI is under 30, stuff like that. That's why we don't use indicators, because a lot of it is really just speculatory. And there are some people who are really successful at that, and they gain kind of an intuition with the market, and they can just look at things and they kind of have a feel for when stuff's going to pump and this and that. But in all reality, that's not the best strategy in my opinion. You're not going to have a very consistent long-term business like that. We want to say, okay, well, if the 4 hour swing structure is bullish and I've got one internal break of structure and we are in a demand zone in a discount, and the 15-minute switch is bullish in this demand zone, then I know that 60% of the time this occurs, it's a win of 4R at least. Stuff like that. That's what you need, because once you have that, and once you know that, you've proven it to yourself. Back testing is great. I'd say 90% of traders don't back test. So you got to think about it. Like, there's a reason that, I don't know that there's so many different statistics. People say 70, 80, 90% of all traders lose over 30% of their money in the first year. It's something insane like that. And I like to think of it like you're competing against all the other traders out there. And whoever puts the most dedicated and efficient work into their trading plan and into their business, that's who's going to win. And when I say puts in the most work, I don't mean stares at a chart all day 24/7. That's great if you're actually learning, but most of the time when you're just camping a chart, it's because you entered a trade when you didn't have a system and now you're tweaking out of it, or it's because you're watching for a trade and you don't know what your direct execution parameters are. Having a system and having confidence in that system backed by real data, whether it's back testing, whether it's skin in the game, whether it's your P&L, you've been profitable with the system, whatever it is, that is going to be more important than 90% of the stuff I can teach you as far as technicals go. So whenever we are looking for trade setups, it's very important to, I recommend having one buy model at first. You can simplify your trading in an insane amount by just, cutting out certain parameters. For instance, I recommend to people that I'm working with that are new to not trade counter 4-hour trend. Now, are there a lot of great trade opportunities, counter trend on the 4-hour? For sure. There's a lot of great trade opportunities, and people that are a little more experienced are great at catching those. But for someone that is new and they're just now doing their own TA and they're just now taking their own trades, they are going to automatically have twice as much confusion. Because, if you are trading a market and, we want to catch every single move, right? So, for instance, if you're trying to catch all of the down moves in a down market, we know we broke structure, okay, well, whenever we come back up to our, supply zone, however we enter, you take the trade and target the lower high. Just being simple like that, instead of saying, okay, well, I'm going to do that, and I'm going to catch this move, and I'm going to short here, and I'm going to catch here. What you do whenever you set those expectations up that you need to trade every single move, you automatically open up your criteria for a trade, which means you will rationalize why a trade is good and why it's going to work and why you should take a trade just because you want to trade, because you feel like you need to catch every single move. And that's not going to be good for newer traders. I always recommend to have as simple of a system as possible, and just trading with the 4-hour trend when you're starting out, that cuts out half the confusion right there. 50% of the confusion is gone immediately. That's going to be paramount, I think, for people that are starting to use their own TA with smart money concepts, because I get a lot of people that, they're trading and they want to trade every order block. They want to trade every single order block. They're going to look and say, oh, there's a 15-minute order block. I'm trading them, setting my limits here, setting short limits here. They got tagged into a trade, get break even, or probably when they're newer, they're just taking a loss. And they continuously do this. They just say, I'm taking every, limit order, but that's not really a system, or it's not a profitable system, I should say.
Thanks for making it to the end of the video. If you want access to the private Discord, use code CASPER, all caps, to start your free trial. That's where I provide my trade signals, teach my private classes, and you have access to one of the best trading communities out there. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to watch my content, and if you ever have any questions, feel free to hit me up on any of my social medias. They are all down in the description with the link to Playbit. Have a great day, and remember, if you can't see the liquidity, then you are the liquidity.